Boom, boom. All right, we are live, brother. We are live on YouTube.
Brilliant.
We have finally moved to YouTube because we finally meet the criteria. Didn't even know that there was a criteria for going live on YouTube, but we are 90 days over 1,000 subscribers. So thank you everybody for subscribing to our YouTube channel. So if you guys are on this channel right now and you guys are listening to this discussion, go ahead and subscribe to it now, like the video so that we can get as many people into these discussions as possible. It always kind of helps for us to have a little bit of feedback, especially when we're doing our live shows, to be able to do that stuff. But I just wanted to check in with, let's check in with each other. How you doing, man?
Yeah, so good. So first of all, good that we kind of passed our probationary period on YouTube.
I can't believe there was even
yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, but
yeah.
You know, doing well. It's an interesting time, you know, as you know, in Los Angeles, we got shut down. Gyms, fitness facilities, and indoor dining and some other things got shut down on Monday, which was not really unexpected at all, from my perspective. But, you know, I'm really surprisingly unaffected by that as far as my mindset. I don't feel badly about that, which we will dig into. It's unfortunate. Let me say that for sure. It's unfortunate, but
I mean, listen,
I think that's part of the landscape. You know, that's part of the landscape right now. So
yeah, I mean, like I don't want to say we called it, but we called it, didn't we?
Well, we did.
I mean,
we did call it. We did call
it.
I mean,
episode 2 or 3 of these shows, I think we were talking about. I think we've always kind of been talking about that this is going to have multiple shutdowns.
Yeah, we did. And so it's really not surprising at all. It's disappointing, but not surprising. But you know what? Doing well. You know, weather's nice. The sun is shining. We've got an amazing member community. We've got an amazing team. I mean, life is good. So it is a weird time, you know, and it's the uncertainty of everything does do a number on your mentality, at least a little bit, because we're in uncertain times. You know, when I flash back to when we went through the Great Recession in 2009, 2010, you and I were 6 years into our business at that point, and that was tough sledding, you know, because the economy just
a picnic though right now.
It really does. I mean, that's the thing is we made it through that. It was very, very challenging as you recall, but that was really nothing compared to this. And the other thing is not just from the economy perspective of how strong or weak it is now compared to what we went through during the Great Recession. And there's no way for them to compare it yet because it's too early. It's not even about that. The psychology of this is completely different. Because recessions are awful, but they are familiar. You know, we go through recessions cyclically. We go through them periodically. And although they all vary, and although the circumstances are different, the depth or the extent of the recession is always different every time. We've seen that movie before. And so, you know, we can kind of flip through the archives of our experiences and compare what we're going through during a recession to what we went through in a previous recession and kind of draw some sort of conclusions about the future. That's how our brains work. There's no basis for comparison right now with this situation, at least in our lifetimes. We've never lived through a pandemic in the United States. Nobody that I know of has. You know, the last serious pandemic, I mean, really extensive pandemic was the Spanish flu. And that was, you know, what, 100 years ago. So This is brand new. And so the interesting dynamic here, when you ask, how am I doing, is the question for everybody with regard to how are you doing is, I think, to be honest about the psychological ramifications of this situation, with the understanding that our brains are geared toward predictability and certainty. And that's what really makes us feel comfortable and safe. And when we don't feel that when we can't predict the future, it's difficult for our brains to comprehend that and get a grasp on that. So I think that with that in mind, I'm doing fairly well, but there is some uneasiness and there is some uncertainty and there is some anxiety right now. But I think that it would be strange if there weren't, because of the uniqueness of the situation. So I think we all should take a beat when we're asking each other, how are you doing? And we're asking ourselves how we're doing, and just be willing to recognize for a second that it's okay to be a little bit, jacked up about this whole thing. And I
Yeah.
am a little bit jacked up about the whole thing.
hmm I agree. I mean, it's funny to say that is I've caught myself from trying to have the immediate gut reaction to I'm fine or I'm doing okay on the days that I'm not doing okay, and just kind of being more honest, be like, no, I'm having a really shitty time right now. I got to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had a buddy of mine call me. Pat called me on, I think it was like Tuesday or Wednesday, and he calls me up and goes, "How you doing?" I go, "I'm having a really shit day today."
Yeah.
And I think that's. And listen, I got off that call, and I felt better because for whatever reason, I got whatever I needed to get off my chest and stuff like that, and I felt a lot better. And then the day after, I felt very optimistic, and I think that has a lot to do with just acknowledging the good days and the bad days. And if you're having a bad day, then say you're having a bad day. Don't try to bottle it up and try to mask it out, especially during these times. I think in these times, it's important for us to just really take note of the highs and the lows, not to dwell on it, not so that you can go into like a deep, dark place or anything like that. But listen, if you need to, then you need to,
Yeah, man. I think that's perfectly put. The mask and the armor is heavy. And, it's a burden for us to carry, and we all do it because that's the way that we go through life to a certain extent. You can't walk through life like an open wound. You do have to, you gotta gear up, and you got to put
Right.
the mask on, and you got to go out into the world, and you've got to take care of business. But it's heavy, it's a heavy burden. And I think that there are times and places where you got to take the mask and the armor off and set them down and like you said, just say, you know what? My gut reaction is, because we have those instinctive reactions, right? It has actually become a little bit of an absurdity in our kind of communications with each other as human beings, that we have these just instinctive questions and answers, right? These call and answers, like, how you doing? Good. How are you doing? Good. It's bullshit a lot of the time,
exactly.
right? Yeah, the chatty
Exactly.
Cathy, right? And when's the last time before Tuesday that when somebody asked you, how are you doing, you actually took a beat to check in with yourself and say, how are you doing now? And to ask yourself how you're doing. Now, you can't do that under every circumstance, and it's not a safe place necessarily to do that with every person. Because if you're going to disrobe, if you're going to disrobe and go, this is me naked, you better make sure that you're with somebody who's not going to laugh, right?
Yeah.
Who's not going to point and laugh and go, really?
So if you're at Trader Joe's checking out and they ask how your day's going,
yeah, exactly.
Probably not the time.
Yeah, it's not the time for you to go. I agree, but in a safe place and with a trustworthy person, I think prior to Tuesday, when's the last time somebody asked you that question and you took a beat and you did a little self-examination, and then you answered the question honestly, without concern for how you were coming across?
I mean, it's been I've done it a couple times during this quarantine, but before quarantine and this time, and it was always everything's great, everything's doing awesome, life is great. Listen, I try to keep as optimistic as possible as a person 24/7, but I'm not superhuman. I've had bad days over the last 40 years of my life. Like, it's not like I don't have my bad days. But before quarantine, listen, even during quarantine, it's probably been, I can count them on one hand where I've actually been honest about how I'm feeling during that time period, because I feel a little obligated and responsible to carry on the burden for not only my family but my community, to make sure that we're always keeping a light of positivity in a very dark time. you know, and I feel that responsibility, and that responsibility is heavy and has been heavy. Um, so I'd be lying right now if I didn't take a couple moments to sit there and take a beat and kind of go, you know, how am I really doing? How am I really doing? Because listen, this is the fight of our lives right now as business owners, as people that depend on us for health and wellness and different things. This is a slug out fest, and there's no end in sight.
No, we're in the first round. It's a 12-round fight.
Yeah.
And we're fighting, you know, our opponent is like 3 weight classes above us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a big fight. You know, it's
Mike
interesting when
Tyson
you
in
talk.
his prime.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because when you're talking about kind of having to maintain that attitude of being upbeat and optimistic, and there is a responsibility to do that for the people around us, and also for the community that we serve with regard to Arena Fitness and our members and everything, because it's not our place to come into that setting with our members and just unload. That's not what they're there for. You know, they're there
Mm-mm.
for us to serve them. And so it is, and it's not that we're living a lie. It's just that, look, when we go into the work setting, we put our game face on, and we bring the best of us to what we do. And there are times when I'll be talking with members and discussing, you know, how I feel, you know, dealing with anxiety or depression or having a tough time or struggling. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, you know, I wouldn't have thought that you would feel that way because you always seem so upbeat. Well, I mean, you know, yes, and I am upbeat and I'm optimistic, but I'm also, that's part of what I need to do for the community,
Mm-hmm.
is to
Mm-hmm.
provide an example of you know, growth mindset, you know, positivity, and so on and so forth, and then do my struggling in another venue, you know. And you know, because the truth is that, and you and I know this about each other, you know, I've had challenges with anxiety and depression since high school, you know, 35 40 years. And it's something that I manage, you know, well. But I think that we always need to remember. I can't remember exactly what the saying is, but I remember my sister posting something on Facebook or something at some point, something about, you know, when you're interacting with somebody, just keep in mind you have no idea what battles they're fighting.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you just don't know what sort of wars they're involved in. So I think that there is some sense in us always being kind of empathetic and compassionate and understanding with people. And then also every once in a while, you do have to kind of just become clean with your crowd of people and just say, hey, you know, we're struggling too. So, and we're kind of in the trenches with our members right now, and sharing that with them and everything. So anyway, that was a little bit more psychology than I think that we either of us anticipated. But but you know what? Listen, it's honest.
It's honest, and it's an interesting question, especially when you ask it to people during this time. You know, so I think it's something that it's a valid discussion to have, and we should continue to have it. What I wanted to talk about today was a little bit about the future of online training, and how this COVID-19 epidemic has changed the face of the fitness industry and many industries, not just the fitness industry, but the restaurant industry and the food and entertainment industry and different things like that. But also, you know, what's bringing about that change is really a question that I keep on coming back to, is why do we suck so bad at getting this under control in America?
Absolutely.
Why are we so distinctly different than the rest of the world? And I just don't, I've got my theories. But what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's a painful question, but I don't think it's a hard question to answer. It's a question that's going to ruffle some feathers. And you do have to kind of, there are some politics involved, and there's human nature involved, and so on and so forth. But I don't think that it's a mystery. The world is struggling with this pandemic right now. And it's not just America, it's the world. It didn't, as a matter of fact, we weren't the first people to get hit by this. You know, it
Right.
came to us second, third, or fourth, or whatever. And yet, when you take a look at the global response, now I'm going to say this: you can't necessarily, you know, I don't know if all of the data coming out of China and Russia is going to be accurate or not. I don't know that. I have my doubts about that. But I think when you look at the UK and you look at parts of Europe and so on and so forth, I think that the data are pretty reliable. And when you look at the differences between the United States and these other regions that are struggling with the coronavirus, there is something that is very, very glaringly obvious, and that is the virus itself, the disease itself, doesn't become exponentially more damaging and powerful once it crosses the US border.
Yeah.
And right? It's the same virus, right? Now, we may have certain mutations and such going on in this country because we're an isolated population. I'm not a biologist. I can't get into that, but I mean, that's plausible that we could have, unique mutations and such like that.
Absolutely.
But the disease is constant. And yet we are experiencing a vastly greater impact from this disease than these other countries. It's the behavior that is different. It's the American behavior that's different than you find in these other countries.
We're testing more. We're testing more, John. We've got more cases.
Yeah.
We're testing more.
Right.
Now,
And we're testing more, but
what do you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, we're testing more, but we've got a bigger population, for one thing. And the other thing, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know from a data perspective what the ratios are or what the percentages are as far as how much a percentage of the population are testing positive. Because if Italy's doing,
I'll give you a stat.
Okay.
We have 4% of the world's population, and we carry 25% of the world's cases.
Right. But this is the percentage that I'm talking about. If we test 100 people and Italy tests 100 people, how many out of those 100 in Italy are testing positive, and how many people in the United States are testing positive? That's going to be kind of a comparing apples to apples type data.
Right.
And in Italy, if you have a 2% positivity rate out of 100 cases, and in the United States you have an 8% positivity result, then the issue isn't the volume of testing we're doing. The issue is that we have a higher positivity rate. So more people are becoming infected on a percentage basis. Now, in all fairness, I don't have that data, so I don't know. But what I do know is that what appears to be the major feature is the lack of American willingness to take the simple precautionary steps to prevent the transmission of this disease, which are hand washing, social distancing, and mask wearing. And mask wearing, of course, is the hot button issue. Now, I can't tell you how many, knockdown, drag out debates I've had with people over the last couple months about mask wearing. And I don't know that we're going to be able to do it here today and in a way that's going to be any more effective than we've done anywhere else. But it seems to me that the reluctance of the American population to embrace the concept of wearing masks is contributing greatly to the transmission of this disease. And I don't think that there's any controversy among the scientific community on this. There might be a small amount of controversy, but really the abundance of research and the abundance of opinion resides very soundly on the side of mask wearing as a preventive measure for the transmission of this disease. I don't think that's debatable. And yet we have a fairly large sector of the American population who doesn't believe that or is unwilling to do that, and considers it an infringement of their civil liberties to be told that they have to wear a mask. And that's unfortunate, because I think even if we think that it might help, that's enough. Isn't that enough? I mean, does somebody actually have to come to you with a pie chart? If you've talked about this before,
Yeah,
you've been telling Hayden since he was, big enough to understand language to cover his mouth when he sneezes. This is not a strange and confusing issue. So it is. It's really interesting to me that the American population's concern with civil liberties is, you know, at a place where where a lot of people are thinking that, my right to not wear a mask is more important than your right to not get sick. And I find that to be an unsettling place to operate from. You're mandated to wear seatbelts too. You're mandated to stop at stoplights and stop signs. This is not the first time in history that the government has mandated safety protocols. It's not for you, it's for the other people. And that's very unsettling to me, and it's very disappointing. So that was kind of I feel like I'm being fairly reasonably politically correct in my language here. I'm saying I think that our lack of willingness to wear masks is contributing greatly to the transmission of this disease. And I've had, personal conversations with people in the medical field who say, absolutely, that's
right.
absolutely true. I don't think that's controversial. So I just don't understand where the data are coming from people who don't believe in that. And I think that we're looking at an extreme case of confirmation bias, where people arrive at a conclusion in advance and then cherry pick the data that supports their position. It's not uncommon. We all do that. It's human characteristic. But Joe, that's what it's about, man. It's about American behavior.
Well, I want to talk about that actually, because let me take it from a different perspective and take a step back, and let's talk about American behavior specifically. Our culture is distinctly different than the rest of the world, and cultures like South Korea, cultures like even Italy and France, and different places around the world like that, especially when it comes to the adoption of wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Our culture has, over the decades, and I kind of want to touch on the obesity problem in America, right? How did we get to the point where we as a nation have had these decade-long epidemic? And we can talk about this a little bit. I posted about it a couple of days ago, as far as like, did we really think that we were going to actually have this, how our bodies react in America is so much different. Our mortality rate is higher than in most places. Did we really think that you can really stack a pandemic on top of an epidemic and really have this turn out okay? And that's something that I haven't heard too many people really talk about. We were sick going into this thing. We were hobbling. We were on one leg going into this pandemic, regardless of even wearing masks and compliance and different things. Our behaviors brought us the epidemic that has been going on for,
And explain what you mean by that. Which epidemic are you talking about?
I'm talking about the epidemic of obesity. I'm talking about the fact that we have 42% of people in America are clinically obese. 42%. By 2030, they are projecting for more than 50% of the nation to be obese. So when we hear about underlying conditions and people dying of COVID-19 because they had pre-existing conditions, anywhere between 1 to 3 pre-existing conditions exist in 94% of the deaths that are related to COVID-19. What did you think that the pre-existing condition was? And so when we talk about human behaviors, let's talk about what brought on the epidemic, right? We overconsume. We eat what we want when we want to eat it. We live sedentary lifestyles, and for lack of a better term, as a nation, discipline isn't the backbone of our culture. So how do you take a culture of people that don't have discipline as a backbone in their culture, and then ask them to comply with something as simple as wearing a mask, and then expect them to comply. Because listen, wearing a mask every single day when you wake up, there's a certain degree of discipline that's involved there. And I don't know that you can really expect this culture in America to comply to the degree that is necessary in order to actually combat this thing. You see it all the time. You walk out around the store, and what are people doing? They're wearing a chin strap, right? Or they're not, or you get this little nose poking up over the head like they're Wilson or something like that, walking around. And it's like, you can't even do it right, you know? And maybe that's the FU that people are kind of walking around.
Yeah.
But I think it really comes down to, listen, we got some big problems in this country.
On the health side?
On the health side of things.
Coming into this. Right.
So
you're absolutely right. You're stacking a pandemic on top of an epidemic that are unrelated.
But that have very much a lot to do with each other. You know, now they do.
Yeah, two different diseases, but the pandemic is capitalizing on the weakness that has been exposed by the epidemic.
And what propelled both of them is the underlying behavior, right? What's the behavior? Or what's the lack of behavior that exists in our culture that is just preventing us from succeeding with an epidemic, I
want to touch on that. But I want to back up for just a second and say that here's what's really interesting about the fact that such a disproportionate number of people who are dying from COVID have premorbidities. And let's just first of all say that that's not everybody. You know, so not everybody is dying COVID's a serious thing. And so it's killing people who have no premorbidities at all. And it's knocking people out. And we know people who have been severely lifetime damaged from COVID who did not have premorbidities. I know 5 people now total who have had COVID. 1 died, 1 almost died, and 3 of them have been impacted for weeks. But let's respect the data, and the data say that 94% of the people who are dying from COVID have a premorbidity. To which you might say, well, that's not okay. So why is that so scary? Well, I'll tell you why it's scary, because we've talked about this before. Half of the people in the United States have cardiovascular disease. 70%, 72% of the American population over the age of 20 are either overweight or obese. We've got 32 to 34 million people in America who have type 2 diabetes. The 90 to 95% of those 32 to 34 million people have type 2 diabetes, which is a premorbidity associated with mortality with regard to COVID. So the big deal is that we've got a massive percentage of our American population, 327-ish million people, who have obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. Hypertension hasn't shown to be as strongly connected, but cardiovascular disease, I believe, has. That's a massive number of people. So that means that if half to 70% of Americans have a premorbidity, then that means that half to 70% of Americans are at huge risk of dying from this disease. So
huge.
That's a big deal.
Let me throw a stat at you, because I actually have the American Health Association Journal posted among individuals with COVID-19 aged less than 60 years of age in New York City, those with a BMI between 30 to 34 and greater than 35 were 1.8 times and 3.6 times more likely to be admitted to critical care, respectively, than individuals with BMI less than 30.
Yeah, that's a big stat. Like, that's a big stat. So clearly, obesity is a big factor for mortality with COVID. And then, so your premise is that we were sick coming into this as a nation, and that is, it's COVID's really shining a light on that, because the people who are especially unhealthy or facing chronic disease are the ones who are more at risk. And that reality, the epidemic of obesity and such, is being exposed right now by the pandemic. So then it circles back to, why is it that we as a nation struggle so mightily with our health? There are a lot of factors, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, and I don't want to go too deeply down this rabbit hole, but you know, we do need to recognize some of the mismatch issues that we have as a species. And this is really a condition that exists with any Western, for the most part, any sort of, you know, Western nation. And that is the fact that we are biologically and evolutionarily mismatched with our environment. And so that creates a difficulty with us in managing our behavior, because we didn't adapt for the conditions that exist. And so we adapted for conditions of scarcity. We are in an environment of abundance, and our biology and our brains don't know how to deal with that. And so evolutionary mismatch really is a big player in the behavioral, you know, it's a big driver as to why we struggle behaviorally to manage ourselves in an environment of abundance. So I'm gonna leave it at that, because you know, I can go off on that.
Abundance.
Yeah, I mean, I can go off on that for hours, but I would encourage.
It's a major point. It's a major point.
It is, and I think anybody who's watching, what I would recommend is just research evolutionary mismatch, and it will explain it to you. And so essentially, we're kids in a candy store, biologically and cognitively. Our brains think that it's 50,000 years ago, and it's not. And there are no conditions of scarcity. We don't have to spend 3 to 5 hours a day foraging for food. We are impeded by artificial light. We do have chronic stress in ways that we probably didn't have in the Paleolithic era. And those things impact our behavior in the modern setting. And that's a big reason why obesity is a thing, and type 2 diabetes is a thing, and cardiovascular disease and all of that. So we can't pin all of this on a lack of willpower, lack of self-control, lack of discipline, lack of, you know, character.
No.
A lot of this has to do with very, very real evolutionary mismatch. However, once you recognize the difficulties that we face in our modern setting with regard to an overabundance of food, a food system that is promoting illness, you know, a technology,
which is vastly different than around the world. We have a unique situation.
We have an especially bad situation, because not only are we in conditions of abundance when it comes to calories, and really unhealthy calories, but we're also in a political climate in which lobbying protects industry much more than the government protects public health and safety. So we're at a disadvantage, because the food companies that are very wealthy are basically able to instill their, you know, put their products into the marketplace and market them however they want to. And there's very little help from the government on the public safety, public health side in protecting us from that.
But don't you think that in America there is a vast majority of people that don't want the government?
Yes, very much so.
Food?
Very much so. So let's take these soda laws that they tried to pass in New York City. And I can't actually remember if they passed or if they got rejected. I don't actually remember. If you're in front of your computer, look that up. I don't remember the circumstances, but here's the argument. The argument was that soda is a leading contributor to obesity and overweight, which is true. That's been established. There's a very strong correlation between soda consumption and obesity and overweight. And because of that, the city government of New York City was taking measures to limit the size of sodas to try to cut down on obesity and overweight. And the population was up in arms about that, because they were like, you're overstepping the bounds of paternalism, and you're treading on civil liberties and my right to drink whatever I want to drink. And they are, to some degree, correct in that. When the government says, we're going to take that decision out of your hands, we're not going to let you order 128 ounce super mega big gulp. We're going to limit it to 16 ounces. I'm not quite sure why somebody needs 128 ounces of Coke to begin with, but that's a different conversation. And so somebody does have a legitimate complaint when they say, you as a government don't have the right to make a decision about what I drink. But here's where I split apart from that. I get that, but here's the problem. Your behavior is impacting the community, because if you get sick, which you will if you drink 64-ounce Cokes all the time, the community has to take on an economic burden in treating that illness. And so there is a spillover effect from your behavior that impacts the other people, the taxpayers of that area. Something like 3.2. Something like $3.2 trillion a year, I think. And I could be wrong on these statistics. So if I am, feel free to call me out, whoever is watching. But over $3 trillion a year, I believe, is spent by the government on healthcare costs. Now, something like 60% of that amount of money, so something around $1.7 trillion, somewhere around that, is spent on preventable diseases. And when you say government funding, what does that really mean? That means your money, and that means my money. The government doesn't have any money. The government has our money. And so if $1.7 trillion are being spent on preventable diseases, what that means is that I, who take care of my health and who manage my health and wellness, and I don't have any diseases, and I'm not a burden on the healthcare system, and I'm not a burden on the insurance system, I am actually paying for you to drink that 64-ounce Coke and then get sick. And then it becomes my responsibility to pay for your healthcare. So the issue of individual rights is not where the argument ends, because you have to take a look at, in what way does that individual right impact the community around you? So, look, I get, yes, the government telling you can't drink 64 ounces of Coke at a time feels like an infringement on your rights. I got to tell you, as a healthy human being, the subsidies that we pay in tax money to the companies that use these raw materials to create the food that makes you sick pisses me off, because that's my tax money that's subsidizing unhealthy food that you're eating. The fact that my tax dollars are going to pay for your chronic disease pisses me off. That feels like an infringement on my rights, because I'd certainly like to see that money redirected toward education. The fact that my health insurance rates go up, even though I'm healthy, because I have to pay for the people who are not managing their health, or who are, not everybody's not managing their health. There are chronic diseases and genetic diseases and so on and so forth. But for the people who are struggling with lifestyle diseases, which are preventable diseases, my insurance rates are much higher, because the costs of that healthcare are much higher. So I'm getting screwed three ways. I'm paying taxes on subsidies that I don't want to pay for, that lower the cost of the food that you eat that makes you sick. I'm paying for your direct medical costs with my tax money, and my insurance costs, my premiums are higher, because the healthy people have to subsidize the premiums of the unhealthy people. So it's a really interesting topic of conversation. You're right. It is an individual right that they're taking away, but they're also protecting the rights of other people. So it's hard to balance that. That was long.
Listen, it was spot on, and it resembles, you could have taken one word out and substituted. You could have taken out soda and put in face mask, and it feels like it's the same problem, right?
It is. Yeah.
Governors and mayors are having this battle between each other, because governors are not, in Georgia, the governor basically mandated that you cannot have face mask, make somebody do the face mask. And mayors are battling with the fact that, listen, our people are not going to do it on their own. They're not going to sit there and voluntarily cover their face. We have to mandate this, because it is affecting public health. And they're in this battle, right? And it feels like, when you were having that discussion, that it's just the same thing recycled a different way. It's the same problem, somehow. My God, how did we get seatbelts?
It was a battle. Listen, I remember when this I remember when this happened, Joe, because when I was a kid, I would lay on the back panel of my parents' Ford Fairmont, right? So in the back seat, vinyl back seat, brown car, by the way, from the
Mhm.
70s, right like where the back seat ends and runs into the back window,
Right.
there's a shelf there. I used to lay on that shelf when my parents would drive. You know what a seatbelt was? If you were in the front seat, it was mom doing this. Right? Okay.
This
Okay. Which is like putting
is
your finger in the muzzle of a gun, right? Um,
I
but
remember. I
that's
still feel that on my chest too.
my wife
It's like,
does that to me sometimes. She
uh,
she does this. I'm like, what are you doing? Um, so I remember those days, and I remember how upset people were when they implemented the the seatbelt laws, and I also remember when they implemented the helmet laws, because when I was a teenager, I had a
Yep.
motorcycle and I didn't have to wear a helmet, which is horrifying to me now. But um, and so you had people with the helmet laws saying you're infringing upon my rights to decide. Okay, but when we're cleaning you up off the pavement, that's costing taxpayer money. So there's,
Yeah.
whose right overrides whose. So it's a strange thing. I think there is I think that the conversation in the United States about personal liberty is such a foundational conversation to us as a people and as a culture, that it is one that's always going to be controversial, because there is this idea that Americans have the right to do whatever they want. That's kind of the notion. America's free. Well, it's really not, though, because we pay taxes, and we have to stop at stop signs, and you can't spit on somebody. That's illegal. You can't smoke in a restaurant. I mean, it's really not. It's just that this is the most recent and glaringly obvious infringement on personal liberties. And I will say this, just to show some respect to people who are opposed to the mask wearing. I get it. Like, I don't agree with you, but I understand that you feel it's an infringement. I just wish that people would be willing to take a look at the consequences of not wearing a mask, because I think that the science is very, very solid on this front, that shows at this point that lack of mask wearing is a huge contributor to transmission. So I don't know. Let's pivot, because
Yeah. Let's pivot. Let's pivot
you and I are
because
not constitutional lawyers, for one thing,
no,
and
no.
uh,
This is above our
so
pay grade.
let's talk about the fact that we were not surprised that we got shut down again.
Mhm.
That, yes, we did call this from the very beginning. That and we anticipate. I think that we're in agreement on the fact that we anticipate that this could be a periodic thing. That there
Oh
could
yeah.
be alternating periods of opening up and shutting down, opening up and shutting down, while we try to kind of clamp down on the spread of the virus. And so I think it would be plausible, and I think it would be reasonable to say that the stop and start aspect of our economy and our businesses is likely, could very well be happening for the next year and a half, 2 years. We have no idea. And so we're shut down now. We don't have an opening, a tentative opening date, right?
No, listen, my suspicion, and I think we talked about this. My suspicion is we ain't opening up till Labor Day, and I'll tell you why. It is the biggest. If we don't open up till Labor Day, what does that give us? 6 weeks to try to crush this as much as possible. The next biggest hurdle that we have that you keep on hearing about, it's the hot topic right now, is kids going back to school in the fall.
Yeah.
We got to get the kids going back to school in the fall. We got to get them in there. It's detrimental to them for various reasons, and not to mention with the economy. If a single parent has to homeschool their kid, how are they going to pay the bills and go to work at the same time? So there's monumental economic reasons why we need to get kids back in school, along with other various reasons as far as education and not having them fall back and different things like that. We have a very small window of opportunity. They're not going to mess this up with a 2-week closure. They're going to try their hardest to try to do as much as they can between now and Labor Day so that we can at least say, hey, you know what? We said no schools, but we got the numbers down. We got them flattened down. Guess what? We can at least do a hybrid or something better than nothing, right? I think that that's what they're going to try to push for. So I would suspect that we are going to be closed till Labor Day. But who knows? Listen, I also suspect that we're actually going to go a little bit further than this closure, and it's going to be a stay-at-home order, especially in Los Angeles County.
I think we're going to have stay-at-home pretty soon. Can I just say something? I think you're absolutely. I think what you're making a very good point. You know what scares me about Labor Day? 2 words: July 4th. You know what scares me more? 2 words: Memorial Day. The problem is that we have these 3 holidays in summer: beginning of summer, middle of summer, which is the most American holiday that we have, and then the end of summer, right? And what do we all do on Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day? We lose our shit. And we go out and we go to the river and we party and all of those things that are wonderful and delightful and all of that. But that's what scares me about Labor Day, is that may be another reason why they chose it, is like, look, the wheels are going to come off the car again on Labor Day. We got to smash this down a little bit because we're way up here right now. If we don't bring it down and we add Labor Day on top of that, we're going to go way up here. So I don't know how long we're going to stay closed, but I think there's a very strong chance, like you said, that it's going to be for a while, and we could be opening and closing for the next 2 years, or year or whatever. So the only real reliable fitness solution that there is at this point is live online coaching or online training of some kind, because we just don't know how often we're going to be open to the public, and we don't know the extent to which the population are going to feel comfortable and safe coming into the facilities. I was just reading an article 2 days ago, I think I told you about, where there's an estimate that 25% of people who used to be gym goers will never come back to the gym, which is a startling statistic. And I don't know, they don't know if that's, a reality or not. That was just based on surveys. So
easy.
Live online coaching really is the option.
What's that going to do to the epidemic that already existed?
What's that? I missed that question.
Or especially if they don't have the online option, which is really surprising. I think everybody has an online option at this point.
I think you have to, because it's really the only option. And I think what's been great about the online option from my perspective is that it was kind of a novelty, I think, before coronavirus. You're kind of cutting in and out.
Yeah, I'm going to switch my Wi-Fi really quick. Hold on, wait a second.
Okay, you got it.
All right, I should have.
Okay, so
hello.
Yeah.
Did I get you
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So prior to coronavirus, kind of the concept of online training was a little bit of a novelty. I don't really know that many people that did it with any degree of regularity. And then we saw that it really became the only option for a prolonged period of time. And then even when we opened up for a very short period of time, the overwhelming majority, 80% or more of our members, continued online instead of coming in. Yeah. And so online training really is the only venue that you can really count on as far as any sort of coaching for online for fitness, which doesn't really bode well for the brick and mortar model moving forward, which is wonderful for us to consider, seeing as we have 2 brick and mortar studios. But what I'm really encouraged by is how strongly and favorably people have embraced live online coaching. That has been amazing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people go, not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not into it. It's not my thing. I'm not going to do it. They do it 3 times. They go, I love this. I love this. You mean I can do this in my underwear? This is phenomenal. Just keep if you're going to do that, that's good. Just keep your camera off, please.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, you probably experienced that a lot more than we did. So kind of, and you're the one that really set up you and Will did an amazing job of getting this whole system of ours set up so that we could really deliver a knockout experience for people, so that it wouldn't feel like live online coaching was a second best option. You know, you worked really hard to really create a formula and a service that would replace in-person training to the extent that people didn't feel like it was substandard. Now, I'm sure 100% of the people don't feel that way, but a surprising number of people, based upon feedback that I've received, have said, I'm loving this. I don't know if I ever want to stop doing online training. So talk to us about, because you know more about this as far as the technology of it and everything. What do you feel really is kind of like the current and the future forecast for live online coaching?
Well, listen, I think online training, first of all, I wanted to say online training has been around for a while. I mean, like, this is not a new thing. I think it's obviously, with the circumstances, has come to the forefront, but I really do think that it's the future of how people are going to train. And that really started to become spearheaded with Peloton a little bit. Peloton kind of spearheaded that a little bit, or brought it back to the forefront as far as the possibilities. And now with everything that we're doing at Arena, what I have seen firsthand is it's really not that different than coming into the gym. And in certain respects, there are some pretty positive things that come about. For me as a coach, listen, technology is great. I mean, like, we've got these 50-inch 4K TVs. I can see, the grains on people's faces so much. And in a lot of respects, listen, a 4K camera can pick up a whole lot more than the human eye. And the benefit for me as a coach is I can actually see more. I've had comments, people go, I can't believe you can tell when my core is engaged and not engaged, because I can see the reaction of the body clearer on a screen that's 4K than I would with my own human eye, which is a trip, because I get when people say, like, I don't understand how you can coach me or coach me better than being in person. And really, listen, the coaching angles are the same. I take a side view. All I'm doing is instead of moving around the body or moving around my client, I'm asking the client to simply change their angle or their view. And it's a really small adjustment, but I get to really coach from that perspective.
I also think, Joe, that what's interesting is that when you're working with multiple people in a live setting, you're having to kind of look around and take things in one at a time. Whereas when you've got multiple people that you're coaching online, they're all on that screen right there. And you can literally watch for commonalities and deviations in movement on one screen that you would not necessarily have the same ability to do in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something else that's really, really neat, because listen, if I have 5 or 6 people on the screen and I'm having them all do the same exercise, well, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb if knees cave in or anything like that. And I'm going to be able to pick it up on the screen really quickly. It's almost like whack-a-mole,
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you came out of alignment.
Right, exactly.
I can pick it up faster. Whereas in a circuit setting where I have 4 or 6 different people all doing a separate exercise.
Yeah.
So I am actually simultaneously viewing 4 to 5 different exercises with 4 to 5 different cues going on simultaneously. And that handicaps somebody's reaction time a little bit. Oh, we've been doing this for 17, 20 years, so we're able to keep it up faster, and the members may not notice it, but we notice it.
Yeah, I mean, and the processor is not meant to take in multiple pieces of information at the same time and process it. The brain processes one piece of information at a time very quickly. So you've got to process this person, boom, process this one. Now that might happen in microseconds, but it's not happening simultaneously. And while the same thing occurs on a screen, since everything is much more close together, you can actually kind of sit back and take a single view of everything that's taking place on that screen, and you can see all of those bits of information as a single message being sent to your brain. At least I think that's the way that it is. I'm not a neuroscientist.
Sorry, I lost you again a little bit, but
yeah, that's okay.
I'm just going to.
Technical difficulties. Let me know when you're back on.
Sorry, I've got a little bit of, so we can continue this discussion. Do
we have you back on yet?
I'm back on.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right.
I got a little bit of an unstable.
That's technology. I don't have you. Let me know when you're back on. I'm sending him a text message right now. And it's just me alone with you guys. I'll wait for him to get back on. But I think one of the things that he was going to say is that we're actually able to not only replicate the experience of working with multiple people at the same time, but in some ways it's actually an improvement, which is kind of surprising to people, but has proven to be a big hit with people. So I tell you what, okay, I think what we're going to do, since we're having technical difficulties right now, is we probably spent way too much time at the beginning of this episode talking about civil liberties and human behavior and all of that stuff. What we really wanted to do was to get into the what's happening now in live online coaching and kind of the future of live online coaching, what we're doing at Arena Fitness to address the the challenges of being shut down, and how we can continue to deliver the same quality experience from a health and wellness perspective online as we're able to do in person. So I will say this, I'm going to go ahead and close this out for today. And next time, Joe and I will jump right back in to this topic of conversation, and we will cover all of the things that are being done on the online live coaching front, the things that we're doing, how we're pivoting to kind of meet the challenge of being shut down and coronavirus, and we'll go from there. So for today, thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments, feel free to post them, even if they're in total disagreement with everything that we said. We'd appreciate your feedback, and we're we're willing to engage in a discussion and a debate about any of the content that we discussed today. Have a great day. Finish off your week strongly, and we will see you soon.